Brilliant.
Hi everyone, so I'm the Group Data Protection Manager for Close Brothers, and today I'll just be giving you some insights into our GDPR journey and what we're doing to reach compliance. So to run you through the agenda, first I'm going to speak about some of the key challenges that businesses have experienced so far in their GDPR programme. I'll then run you through Close Brothers' approach to GDPR compliance, and lastly I'll give you some insight into some of the lessons we've learned in hope that they can assist you guys as well. So first things first, some of the key challenges that businesses have experienced so far. First one is actually knowing where to start the programme. Like Jill said, we've yet to receive all the guidance from the regulator, and for those who aren't legal professionals, the GDPR can be a complicated piece of legislation. So a number of firms have struggled to understand how the legislation itself will impact their day-to-day business operations. My guidance here is keep a really close eye on the ICO website, the Article 29 Working Party as well. If you go onto their website, they have a number of guidance documents that they've created. So just to repeat, that's the Article 29 Working Party. Definitely worth keeping an eye on the guidance, and also follow the ICO. They do have a number of blog posts so that when new guidance does come out, you'll be able to go and take a look. One of the second things that businesses have struggled in is because GDPR is such a massive programme, it cuts across a number of departments. So it's not just going to be your marketing team or your legal team. It will go through your sales team, operations, IT, information security. And because of this, it sometimes can be quite difficult to assign responsibility for certain deliverables because everyone just does this. So you need to make sure that when you are assigning responsibility for deliverables, you're very clear as to which team and which people are responsible for which task. Understanding what data the business processes. So do you all have a good understanding of the information that you hold? And when I say a good understanding, I mean, do you know what data you collect, why you collect it, what are the legal bases for collecting it, who do you pass the data on to, and when you pass this data, in what manner do you pass it on? Is it by password protected email? Do you just hand it to different companies? How long do you keep the data for, and where do you store it? This is all information that you need to gather about your data before you can really kick off your GDPR programme. Data protection officer, like Jill said, many of you may not particularly need a data protection officer under the legislation, but here one thing I will mention is anybody who's advising you on data protection, make sure that you have the right specialist providing you advice. The last thing you want is incorrect advice from somebody that has just come and said, I've had 5 months experience in DP and I'm ready to give you all this great legal advice. So there's a lot of demand in the market right now, and unfortunately not that much supply. So businesses have struggled slightly in this instance as well. Data deletion, do all your systems delete information? So a number of legacy systems weren't built with data deletion in mind, and because of this, because of the fines under GDPR, now a number of businesses are realising the importance of making sure that they delete information when they no longer need it. This can be costly, it can take a lot of time, and it can take resource. So make sure you keep an eye on this. One thing I will say is if you can't afford to implement deletion functionality in all of your systems, prioritise the ones that hold the most information and the ones that hold the most sensitive information. So when it comes to data protection, always make sure you prioritise here if you know that you can't reach full compliance by May. Third parties, so as Jill explained data processors to you, if you have a number of data processors, the GDPR now requires you to have specific contractual clauses in all your contracts with data processors. This is a nightmare for a number of companies because it means that they need to renegotiate contracts, but I'll talk you through some easier steps that we've taken on this part soon. Also due diligence, so you are required to do due diligence on your data processors if you share personal information with them. You should be doing due diligence at the beginning before you engage with them, and depending on the sensitivity of the information they hold within your relationship with them as well. And lastly, time and effort required. It's a massive project, it cuts across a number of different departments, and it will take some time. So just be realistic when you are assigning budget and resource to GDPR. So I'll talk you through our approach to GDPR compliance. I can't talk you through all our work streams because we'll be here all day and it's boring. But some of the main pieces of information here I'll give you. So we were aware that when we started GDPR, we needed to get support from the board and senior management. Otherwise, we wouldn't have managed to actually get anything done. So what we did is we brought in external counsel to do GDPR awareness sessions for senior management. And what they did is they explained what GDPR was, how it would impact our business, and the possible consequences of us not complying. These awareness sessions were really, really helpful, and we ended up getting a lot of support for GDPR. GDPR was something that's spoken about now in the board. Because of this, it made things a lot easier when we were trying to actually implement change within the programme. So I definitely recommend do awareness for your staff, because they're not going to be on board if they don't understand the importance of data protection and GDPR. Once we did the awareness sessions, we needed to have a good understanding of the information that we processed. So we produced template information asset registers. Within these registers, we asked a number of questions that I've just asked to all of you. What data do we process? What do we do with it? Where do we send it? Etc. When we produced these templates, we then produced a guidance document with the template, telling people exactly how we expected them to fill it out. And we did a number of workshops where we walked people through the information asset registers to answer questions and to explain how we wanted these registers to look. The good thing about data mapping in your information asset registers is now we can use that to comply with the GDPR internal records requirements. So if the ICO or any other regulator comes and says, we want to see your records of processing, we just bring out the information asset registers. Gap analysis. Once we completed our information asset registers for all the departments that process personal data, we were then in a position to do a gap analysis to understand where we had gaps and how we needed to fill them. The way we did this, it may give you some ideas for your organisations, is we reviewed all our internal documents, so from data protection policies, information security policies, and departmental processes. Once we reviewed all our internal facing documents, we reviewed all our customer facing documents. So in your customer documents, do you talk about data protection? Do you talk about the Data Protection Act? If so, you'll need to change that and mention the GDPR or the new data protection bill that's in train. After we did this, we conducted a number of workshops with key stakeholders who really understood the business's day-to-day processes, and we got them to talk us through their processes to see where we may recognise gaps. Once we did the gap analysis, we were in a position to start scoping our project. This is where we defined budget, resource requirements, contingency plans, etc. My piece of advice here is be really realistic when you're setting budget for the GDPR. We had some departments that expected 1 or 2 of their employees to essentially deliver their GDPR requirements off the side of their desk. And it's not ideal and it's not realistic because they weren't able to dedicate the time that they needed. So just be realistic when you are assigning people to deliver for GDPR. After we scoped, I'll talk you now through some of the key GDPR work streams. So after the scoping was done, we put together some work streams that were going to help us with GDPR compliance. One of the first things we did is we needed to have a proper data protection policy suite that complied with GDPR, because the current one we had just complied with the Data Protection Act. Within the policy suite, it was really important to show our interpretation of GDPR, so that if our staff needed to find out any information, they didn't go to the legislation itself, which then causes risk of misinterpretation, but they went to our local policies and they could understand how we wanted them to comply with GDPR. It's also stated the main principles that we expected all our employees to comply with. Under the policy, and I'll show you here, we had a number of standards that gave more detailed information on specific parts of GDPR. So for example, individual rights, how to manage any personal data breaches, lawful grounds for processing, marketing, etc. And below the standards, we have a number of departmental procedures to help them understand how exactly they should comply with subject access requests and other customer rights. Then we worked with our information security team, and don't have too much to say about this, but we worked with InfoSec to make sure that we had assurance that we had robust processes in place to protect our information. This to me is, I think, the most important thing that you need to do. Make sure that your information is protected. Make sure you have the right IT controls in place, and make sure you're looking after your information, because data breaches is when you have to report to the ICO. So when the ICO says you have to report on data breaches, it's on security breaches. Customer requests, 3 things that we did here. One is we produced documents so that all staff could understand what a customer request was or an individual request was under the GDPR. Second piece was to work with IT to make sure our systems had the tools and the functionality in place for staff to be able to comply with customer requests. And the third thing was to adequately train our staff to make sure they can recognise requests and for them to understand processes to make sure they can comply within the 30-day period. It's really, really important you train your staff and you understand yourselves how to recognise individual requests. The reason I say this is we had a situation a while ago where a customer was going back to back on emails with a staff member, and they then said that they wanted all the information in regards to their complaint sent over to them. They didn't mention data protection, and they didn't mention the term subject access request. And because of that, the staff member couldn't recognise that there was a subject access request in the email. So please keep in mind, they don't have to mention GDPR, they don't have to mention data protection, and they don't have to say the term subject access. ICO does give good information around this, so definitely check their website for more information. Privacy by design has been really great for us as a company, not just because it helps us to comply with regulation, but it saves us time and resource. And the reason I say this is because the GDPR requires you to make sure you understand the risks to personal information every time you have a new project or business change. What we've done now is we've created a data protection impact assessment template. And within this template, you have to answer 5 questions about the project or the change. Depending on how you answer those questions, we can sign it off from there, or you'll have to do a more detailed document for us to really get an understanding of the risks. We've added this data protection impact assessment early on in our project lifecycle, which means people come to us early on, tell us what they want to do, and we can then provide them with guidance and help them throughout the project. The reason this has saved us a lot of time is because previously we'd have people contacting us when they were towards the end of the project. And then I have to give them the bad news and say, this isn't compliant, you're going to have to go all the way back and look at new providers or do something new. So that ends up costing time. So definitely worth thinking about data protection from the beginning, anytime you want to do something new with personal information or you're engaging any new third-party processes. Fair processing notices. So this is where we need to provide information to all our customers and our employees, so they'll tell them exactly what we're doing with their information. The ICO has some really good guidance on this, where it tells you exactly what information you need to include in these. Our information asset registers really helped us in this because it gave us exactly what we did with information. It gave us all the details. So we worked really closely with our legal team to develop new privacy notices that should be going on our websites, hopefully in the next month or so. DPO and data protection responsibilities. We've assigned a senior data protection officer who reports directly into the board. We also now have a new data protection target operating model, which means that we have a number of data protection specialists that can advise different business units depending on the areas of risk and the projects that they're doing. So it's really helpful to make sure you understand DP enough depending on the size of your business, or you're bringing the right specialist to be able to give you the right guidance. Third-party contracts. This has been a big piece of work. What we've had to do is we've had to go and look at all our suppliers, and that's thousands. We've had to separate them between data controller and data processor. The GDPR gives specific contractual clauses it wants you to have in place with your data processors, but it doesn't mention specific clauses you need in place with your controllers. So we've prioritised for right now our data processors. Instead of opening and renegotiating contracts, because that's time consuming, costs money, and we don't want to do that, we've produced data processing agreements, which are essentially side letters. Within this side letter, there's all the clauses that we expect people to follow because the GDPR tells us we have to. And then there's a one-pager that links every clause to the article of the GDPR, which means a number of suppliers don't even want to negotiate or argue because all we're doing is telling them exactly what we want them to do, and we're saying that it links to the GDPR. So instead of opening and renegotiating contracts, send side letters, explain to them how this links to the GDPR article. You should have external solicitors that will be able to assist you on this, and it's an easier process. So a few of the lessons that we've learned that should hopefully help you. Discovery work. When we were doing our information asset registers, some people forgot to include unstructured data. So the information that you're keeping in shared drives, the information that you're keeping in cabinets, and the information that you may be keeping in decommissioned systems. So if you have a system that you no longer use, but the data hasn't been deleted from that system, it's still susceptible to hacking. So you need to make sure that if there's a lot of information in these systems, even if it's got very limited access or you don't use it anymore, you need to ensure you at least have the right security processes in place to protect that information. So don't forget about these when doing your data mapping exercises. Employee data. I've spoken a lot about customers. Don't forget your employees. We have a major HR workstream in place. Please remember that all employees still have the same rights as customers. They still have the rights to privacy notices. They need to understand what you're doing with their information, and they also have all the customer rights, so they can put forward subject access, exactly like what Jill said. So have processes in place so that you can manage these. Templates. When it comes to privacy notices, when it comes to information asset registers, and when it comes to clauses in your contracts, don't start from scratch. There's so many templates out there. If you're dealing with external consultants or external counsel, ask them if they can provide you with templates. It saves you a lot of time and effort. And there's lots of free resources online. So go on websites, see what you can get, because they can give you a head start rather than trying to produce documentation from scratch. And lastly, dry runs. Like I said, we have 72 hours to notify the ICO if there is a security breach. Your processes might be great for this, but have you done any dry runs? So have you practiced in the event of a data breach? How does your process work in practice to notify the ICO? This is really helpful and it's really important because you don't want the first time you practice is when you actually have a real breach. So do some dry runs within your business. It's been really helpful for us. And another thing I'll say just before I finish up, like I said, if you're not going to be fully compliant by May, prioritise. Look at the things that may cause most detriment to individuals, such as your customers and your employees, and prioritise with that. You may not be able to be 100% compliant by May, but just make sure you're prioritising the most important things and keep an audit trail of everything you are doing, so that if you are ever questioned by the ICO, you can explain your train of thought, you can explain why you've prioritised certain things as well. And that's pretty much it from me. Good luck, guys.